All right, welcome everyone. My name is Evan Clark. I'm Executive Director of Atheists United. We're a Los Angeles-based nonprofit that's been around since 1982, hosting speakers and incredible programming for the local atheists, humanists, and otherwise non-religious community in California. Just 2 years ago, we started something called a pop-up speaker series where we bring in incredible speakers and experts from all over the world and from a diversity of issues and passions. And today we have an incredible speaker for you today on a topic we've been meaning to cover for a while, so we're thrilled to host them. But before I introduce them, I just want to encourage you all to check out Atheists United if you are looking for some community or a place to do advocacy locally from a non-religious perspective. We have new programs we are launching all the time, including one happening tonight called Smart Recovery. We just launched our first drug and alcohol recovery-based program for those that want a scientific and secular approach to recovery program. So check out atheistunited.org if you have any more questions about Atheists United or our programs. For all of you that are members of our community, thank you for joining us and thank you for your ongoing support. So let me hop into the introduction of our speaker. Let's not wait any longer, and then I will hand over the screen control and we will get started. The format of our meetings, we have our speaker speak as long as they would like. Okay, we cut them probably at around 45 minutes to keep everyone's time conscious, and then we will facilitate questions. So please put your questions in the chat feature on Zoom or on our live stream, and we'll go and find those and facilitate Q&A with the speaker. And then after probably about 20-30 minutes of Q&A, we will end the live stream, and anyone that wants to ask questions directly to the speaker is welcome to do that. All right, with that, let's get going. We're incredibly excited to be hosting Julia Irzyk as our pop-up speaker this month. Julia currently co-authors the treatise Disabilities and the Law, 4th edition, published by Thomson Reuters, which is updated twice annually. Her legal specialties are special education law and employment discrimination. She also provides pro bono special education advocacy. She's recently written articles on COVID issues in employment for the Journal of Law, Medicine, and Ethics, and for Hastings Center Report. She holds a BA from the University of Texas and a JD from Georgetown University Law Center. With that, we want to give you the floor, and thank you for joining us.
It would definitely help if I unmuted myself. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for, especially to Evan and Carly for inviting me to talk about something that I'm passionate about. And I hope that we can have an exciting and informative discussion at the very least. This is by no means comprehensive because I could teach an entire course just on employment and disability law. So, you know, if any of you are running a law school, just saying. But I would like to give sort of a broad overview of the employment issues that COVID has raised. First, before I continue and get going, and I try to screen share, I just want to make sure everyone can hear me. I have a terrible tendency of speaking very quickly, so if I am talking too fast, just a hand signal to slow me down. It won't hurt my feelings. I know how fast I talk. Oh my goodness, I see a cute cat. Sorry, I get distracted by adorable animals. So let me try to share my screen here. Share it. Is it doing anything? Nope. Okay, I think we all can see my screen. Excellent. Okay, so I am going to be talking about COVID and disability discrimination. COVID has really changed the way that we have to think about accommodation. And it's been a really long 18 months for most of us. I just left the house for the first time last week. And I mean, for the first time since March 16th of 2020. And I haven't seen my parents since December 2019. It's been a long 18 months. And one of the biggest adjustments we've all had to make is getting used to Zooming, working from home, and not going into stores. So we have to adjust our thinking about all issues in light of COVID, and disability and employment is one of those that really needs some more attention. So who is protected under the ADA and relevant state laws? To be a person with a disability, you need to be substantially limited in one or more major life activities. So a substantial limitation is not a limitation that's transitory or minor. For instance, a sprained ankle is not a disability. A broken arm is not a disability. Major life activities include, but are not limited to, caring for oneself, performing manual tasks, seeing, hearing, eating, sleeping, walking, standing, lifting, bending, speaking, breathing, learning, reading, concentrating, thinking, communicating, and working. There are a lot of things that are major life activities, but to be disabled, you have to be substantially limited, not moderately limited, substantially limited in one or more major life activities. And being substantially limited in one major life activity ends the discussion. You don't have to be limited in all of them. A blind person does not also need to have difficulty walking. The case in case of people who are blind or deaf or paraplegic, those seem to be sort of our more easy cases to determine, obviously this person has a disability. But the cases where it gets more difficult are things like asthma, diabetes, lupus. I don't know why I said diabetes like Wilford Brimley. Sorry. And lupus, fibromyalgia, those sorts of things, the courts have had mixed results on. Additionally, you could be regarded as having an impairment. So if your employer thinks that you're disabled, whether or not you actually are, is sufficient under that standard, or if you have a record of having an impairment. Let's say I, for example, had cancer last year. I didn't, this is an example, hypothetical. If I had cancer last year, I suddenly, and I'm now cancer-free, I may have been substantially limited when the cancer was active, and now I may have a record of such an impairment. And if my employer tried to make determinations about my employment based on my record of, they say, oh, you can't do that because you're too sick, that would be discrimination, disability discrimination, and I would therefore have a disability. Well, we now have a whole new class of people who have disabilities, those who are recovering from what has now been called long COVID, or in the past was called long haul COVID. People with long COVID may have difficulties breathing, climbing steps, standing on their feet for a long time, working, taking care of themselves. And so now we have a whole group of new people who did not necessarily have disabilities before the start of the pandemic, but now are people with disabilities. So we need to those people need to be accommodated as well. However, in order to fall under the ADA, you not only need to be a person with a disability, you must also be otherwise qualified to carry out the essential functions with or without reasonable accommodation. Now, this has changed since the 2008 ADA amendments. Before, they would say, well, if you can hear with, if you can hear with hearing aids or see with glasses, you don't have a disability. But now the courts have said we don't have to take into account mitigating measures. That's a little in the weeds, so I'll just move it along. The essential functions. Now, this is where you must be otherwise qualified to carry out the essential functions of the program. The essential functions are functions for which you were hired, that are essential to the job. For example, it would be very difficult for a waiter or waitress to say, I don't want to come to the office anymore. I don't want to wait tables, physically wait tables. I can do my job by Zoom. For wait staff, being physically present to hand out the food is an essential function of the job that cannot be eliminated. You can't be a waiter if you don't wait. So the employer then has an opportunity to say, it would be an undue hardship for me to allow you to have that accommodation. And they also don't have to fundamentally alter the program. They don't have to suddenly deliver food because you don't want to work at the restaurant anymore. that would fundamentally alter the nature of the program. They don't have to transfer responsibilities to another employee. If you need accommodation, they don't need to have a different waiter who picks up all your shifts. That would be unfair to that waiter. And they also don't have to lower standards. So if there is a heavy lifting requirement that is essential to the job, such as mail carrier, for example, it is an essential function, and you cannot eliminate or lower the weight limit requirement just to allow an employee with a disability to work. Is there anything else in that zone I need to go over before I continue? I know I'm aware of how fast I talk. Additionally, and here's where things got interesting during COVID, you must not pose a direct threat to yourself or to other people. And in the context of COVID, this became a real difficult issue because a number of us employees are immunocompromised, and people coming into the store without wearing masks are a direct threat if you are immunocompromised. So I'm going to get into that more in a moment with mask wearing and vaccination records. I'm have more in-depth discussion about those things, but the issue about the safety, we don't have to accommodate you if to do so would put other people at risk. This often comes up in the context of diabetic train conductors, whether the fact that they could have a diabetic incident should be disqualifying. And if it's a job with a high degree of safety and for other people, the courts have found generally that you can increase the standards, to keep everybody else safe. Oops, I went too far. I'm just going to go back and forth over and over for no good reason. But to be accommodated in your employment, you need to tell your employer that you're disabled and have any appropriate documentation, give it to them in a timely manner. Those are set down by state guidelines or the EEOC. Those are statute of limitation issues. And so you need to provide your employer with a statement of the limitations that you have and any known accommodations that you are requesting. It is the duty, and this is something that people don't realize a lot, it is the duty of the employee to suggest a reasonable accommodation. The employer needs to give them a reasonable accommodation, not any accommodation that they want. You could say, well, I could do this job from home. And the employer said, well, instead, I'm going to give you a private office where you don't have to interact with other people. That the courts may find is very reasonable. Your preferred accommodation is not the one that is required to be given. But the emphasis here is on the interactive process. An employer who makes a good faith effort to try to accommodate an employee will be given great deference by the courts. What they are not big fans of is when you say, she's a wheelchair user and we don't have any wheelchair accessible spots, sorry, and don't try to find an accommodation that would be workable. So the ADA is the main federal statute. There's also the Rehab Act, Title VII, but for our purposes, we're just going to stick with the ADA because life is easier there. However, because this is a California organization, I did want to make you aware that federally, the threshold for employer is 15 employees, but in California, it's only 5. So if you have 5 full-time employees, you are subject to the ADA in California. So it's very important that employers take that into account. One of the issues that's now arisen since we have these marvelous, fabulous scientific marvels that are the vaccines is some people who are immunocompromised are not developing antibodies. And if you are an immunocompromised person and you want to know if you got vaccinated and you want to know if you've developed antibodies, I highly recommend getting the anti-spike IgG test. This is the test that Dr. Fauci recommends for immunocompromised people to let you know if you made antibodies. I am immunocompromised due to lupus, which I'm very public about and open about as a lupus activist. And I was, because of the medication I take, I was highly concerned that I didn't make antibodies. But I am very happy to say that I am flush with antibodies. I have antibodies on top of antibodies, and I'm able to go back into my physical office, was able to go back into my physical office for the first time last week, which made me very happy. But let's say you're immunocompromised and may not have fallen under the definition, because lupus, despite my lived experience, frequently is found by the courts not to be a disability. And so unfortunately, people with these inflammatory conditions such as Ehlers-Danlos or lupus or fibromyalgia, the courts frequently find they're not disabling conditions. However, if you don't develop antibodies, that is very similar to HIV cases. The courts have found that the inability of certain bodily systems to make certain proteins, antibodies, T cells, etc., that failure is a disabling condition. So now people who had a disability but may not have been under the ADA defined as a person with a disability may now have a disability solely because they can't make the antibodies. So that will be an interesting issue to keep an eye on. It's not been litigated yet, but I guarantee it will be. Also, a lot of us got used to being at home with our kitties and doggies, or snakes and birds. I know that my cat Disney has had my undivided attention for the last 18 months. And it's going to be very difficult for all of us to go back to in-person work at the office. Some people are saying that they would like to be able to bring their animals with them to the office. Well, this sets up some of those issues that we've heard about, especially with the airlines letting all kinds of snakes on planes, service peacocks and whatnot. Emotional support animals are an entirely different category from service animals. Service dogs and ponies, there are certain religions that don't allow you to have a dog be your service animal, so they use service ponies. So dogs and ponies, if they provide a service, do something being the test, you can bring service animals anywhere. ESAs are only in flying, in housing, in education. If you're a college student and you want to keep your support cat in the dorm, that is different than wanting to bring your support cat to the office. So if with the mental health issues, I believe that there will be some issues where employees will say to their employers, I would like to be able to bring my emotional support dog or cat to the office, and the employer will have to consider that. A lot of people suffered from a lot of mental health impairments from the isolation of the pandemic, especially our older Americans. And finally, in this zone of questions, what documentation can or should be required to demonstrate that a person has a disability? If you have the results of your anti-spike IgG test that say you didn't develop antibodies, that would be sufficient. A note from your doctor saying that you can't be vaccinated because you're allergic to polyethylene glycol, which is one of the tiny inert ingredients in the Pfizer vaccine. It's an extraordinarily rare allergy, but if you had a note from your doctor that said, I'm allergic, that would be sufficient documentation. In an employment context, you show your doctor something that says she needs to be able to drink water every 2 hours. Those sorts of documentations are the responsibility of the employee to provide to the employer. But if they're asking for more extensive documentation, that is a litigable issue to discuss who would be required to pay for that. If they said that's insufficient, we think you really do produce antibodies, we want you to get this other test, then it may be their responsibility to pay for it. So I'm moving on from this section. Am I talking too fast? I know I do it. Okay.
Doing great.
Vaccination issues. Can employers mandate vaccines? Well, The EEOC has said that they can, with exceptions for medical and religious exemptions. Now, there are very few people that are allergic to these vaccines. The number of inert ingredients is very small. It's not like a traditional flu vaccine. It does not have a lot of those same ingredients that people have allergies to. So the number of people that will have vaccine issues are going to be rare. So far, the only employers that have been mandating vaccination are in healthcare settings, hospital employees, nursing care facilities, and quite frankly, I don't have a lot of sympathy. This is my personal opinion. I don't have a lot of sympathy for medical workers who say, I don't want to be vaccinated. When you're responsible for caring for our elderly or people with other, I shouldn't get COVID because I went into a hospital for a car accident. In Houston, which is my hometown, the hospital workers at Methodist Hospital in Houston sued to prevent their employer from forcing them to be vaccinated. And the courts were unsympathetic. I happen to agree. You're in healthcare. There's no justification not to be vaccinated other than the limited exemptions. I've already discussed what if they can't be vaccinated because they're allergic, what if they can't make antibodies. So that leads me to the next question, which is, let's say you can't make antibodies. Now you're at risk from everyone else in your office, especially with the Delta variant, which has been spreading more widely. And I'm going to talk about mask wearing in a moment, which may be the accommodation that your employer has to provide. Finally, religious objections. There are some religions that object to vaccines. And in those cases, there's not a lot of documentation that you can ask for. But I would strongly recommend to employers to encourage their employees to get vaccinated for everybody's sake. The importance of us all embracing science and getting vaccinated. I've had both my Moderna vaccines. I'm very excited about it. I think that the vaccines are an incredible resource, and I'm happy to talk at length about them. But employers can provide incentives to their employees to get vaccinated. When it becomes coercive is sort of the issue. When you imply, if you're saying, okay, like in California, we have the weird $50,000 wheel thing lottery that they're doing for people who've been vaccinated. It's like giving everybody a $1 lottery ticket. It's not coercive. It's not like you can't have the kidney you need unless you get vaccinated. That would be coercive. And we're trying to figure out what can an employer provide as an incentive. The EEOC has said they can provide incentives, but they haven't said how much that could be. So that's another issue. When does it become coercive? And masking. So now that today we're all free. The pandemic's over in California. We can all go everywhere sans masks. But can I, as a business owner, still require mask wearing in my business if the CDC has said that you can safely not wear masks? Yes, I can. Mask wearing is the best way to protect those of us who are immunocompromised, especially those of us who don't make antibodies. And wearing a mask so if I don't make antibodies and I need to be accommodated at my job, I can say to my employer, I think as my accommodation, all of the people who are refusing to be vaccinated need to wear masks. And that would be, in my opinion, reasonable. But we haven't had any, I am certain that we will have more court guidance on these issues in the next 6 months. We've gotten some cases, and the cases that we've seen so far have given a lot of deference to business owners in setting their own standards. What about an employee that has a disability preventing mask wearing? There are absolutely disabilities that prevent mask wearing. Certain types of skin conditions would prevent mask wearing. Certain types of autism can cause panic attacks in mask wearing. And in that case, for an employee who cannot wear a mask, you need to determine if they are a direct threat to others. If this employee can't wear masks and can't be vaccinated or won't be vaccinated, you don't have an obligation to put other employees at risk in order to accommodate the employee who cannot wear masks. And that is what the direct threat issue that I raised earlier was about. So, in conclusion, this is Disney, my service cat. She doesn't know she's a service cat. She just knows she's adorable. And it's very important that we all take stock of where we are in this moment of the pandemic. We're recovering, but we have a long way to go, and we just all need to. The best thing you can do is to try to accommodate and open a dialogue with employees in order to make sure that you aren't going to get in trouble with the government. But most importantly, people with disabilities, we're kind of awesome, and we make pretty fantastic employees. I also happen to be a terrific boss, and it's very important that we all do what we can to be part of the solution. I open it up to questions, comments, observations, thoughts, feelings, emotions, political statements, and compliments to the cat.
Awesome, thank you. All right, you can go ahead and turn off the screen sharing. I'll kick it off with a few questions. For those of you that would like to participate, though, please go ahead and put your questions in the chat or comment on our live stream, and we'll track them down and ask them. Thank you.
I do apologize if I spoke too quickly. It is my habit.
No.
I don't know why. My mom does it. I get it from her. I blame her.
No, this was wonderful.
We also have I also have a forthcoming article on COVID and disability discrimination law that I'm co-authoring with my co-author on my book, Laura, who happens to be my mom, and Mark, who happens to be my dad. They're both professors at the University of Louisville, my mom at the School of Law, and my dad at both the School of Law and the School of Medicine, because we're Jews and we're overeducated, I guess.
Wonderful. We like overeducated in our groups.
Yeah, being smart is never a downside.
Exactly. So, this is wonderful. We've been having lots of conversations in our community about advocacy in this space. And we often wind up on the pseudoscience side, and we're doing a lot of public education campaigns in the skeptic and atheist communities. But I'm really curious about where you see opportunities for the law to be more just. Let's start with vaccines, for instance. I know California is one of the few states that got rid of, at least for public schools, their religious exemption. I'm curious if you have any thoughts on that, and where else there might be opportunities to create more good, more justice around this, and how that would impact communities like the disability community.
That's an excellent question. Could you just rephrase the last part of it, just so I make sure I'm answering it correctly?
Sure.
I also got distracted by the awesome question about the antibody type test, which is the anti-spike IgG test. My dad is a med school professor, and he was on a call with Dr. Fauci, who said, "This is the test to get." And he immediately called me and said, "This is the test that Dr. Fauci told you to go get." So I'm sharing that with everybody. But
Yes.
your question about ways to get in, personally, I'm not a big fan of religious exemptions to vaccination because you're putting other children who cannot be vaccinated for health reasons at risk. And that, to me, is never a good balance. However, in terms of where we might come down on public schools, I think that the big difference will be when the emergency use authorization turns into a full authorization. And I think at that point, people will feel a lot more comfortable requiring the vaccine rather than now people, the argument that the nurses at Methodist Hospital made was that it's an emergency use authorization and it's not safe. It's very safe. It's an incredibly safe vaccine. All of them are. The only caution I would have about the Johnson & Johnson is if you're a woman in childbearing years, I wouldn't necessarily recommend it because of the issue with the blood clotting. But if you're a man, if you're postmenopausal, if you are, I got both Modernas. I'm happy about both Modernas. My dad got both Pfizers. My parents got both Pfizers. My older sister got a Johnson & Johnson. So we've run the full gamut at our house, and we recommend them all. They're very, it is the best thing that we can do for the disability community is to all those of us who can get vaccinated.
Right. And we'll move on to other topics, but the atheist community always likes a good conversation about things where religion is being privileged in our law. And so I'm kind of like, I will
say that this Supreme Court, the current makeup of the court, has shifted so that it is definitely more pro-religious exemption than it would have been when Ruth Bader Ginsburg was alive and we didn't have Justice Amy Coney Barrett. I think that this court is going to be very deferential to religious exemptions. And I mean, I think that's unfortunate, but this is one of those arguments that Democrats are making for court packing or expansion. It's not even court packing. It's just balancing. But that's my politics, and that's a whole separate thing.
Yeah. And my question is kind of, can you illuminate a little bit more of the extent of religious exemption in disability law? I was just Googling while you were talking about like Title III of the ADA as completely exempt to all church locations, even if they're doing secular activities in it. And I know we actually have the executive director of American Atheists on this call. I'll post a link in the chat of a campaign. They just launched a new website about religious exemptions coming, especially around health law that came with COVID, because they're one of the only organizations tracking those. But
the expert on this is actually my dad. So I will give you a link to an article that he wrote about this. I'll send you the link as soon as we're done so that you can post it. But the thing about religious exemptions, especially in the employment context, is a religious school, a religious organization, a religiously run company can refuse to hire someone because they're a wheelchair user, and there's nothing we can really do about it. I'm not a fan of that. I think that if you meet their religious qualifications, you shouldn't be able to. They shouldn't be able to discriminate based on your disability. But that's my feeling about everything all the time. Carly, do you have a question? I'm sorry.
The question was going to be kind of other, like service ponies. I had no idea that was even related to religious exemptions, that something like that could exist. So yes. I was kind of getting at if there's any more.
There's a great article about ponies that my mom wrote. I swear I'm not just promoting my parents today. They're smart people, but they do their own speeches. But it's called Puppies, Ponies, Parrots, and Pigs, something like that. And it's a great overview of the animals exceptions. If you are interested in looking at any of those, it's called Puppies, Ponies, Pigs, and Parrots: Policies, Practices, and Procedures in Pads, Pubs, Planes, and Professions. Because my mother loves alliteration. Where we work, live, work, and play, and how we get there. Animals in public places, housing, employment, and transportation. It's from the Animal Law Review from 2018. It's Professor Laura Rothstein. Puppies, Ponies, Pigs, and Parrots. And she did a very extensive, she and I are working on, the three of us are working on an article about COVID issues, but she is sort of the expert on ponies on planes. There are a lot of, oddly, there are a lot of pony cases. One is a amusing anecdote. Was a woman who had spina bifida, and she had a service pony, but the pony didn't do anything. She leaned on the pony and it made her feel better. And that was not a service animal. So there are some pony cases in our book. If you are desperate for pony cases, I can point them in your direction, point you in their direction.
I'm curious how much of the policy debates about disability law, about health law, are being completely destroyed or convoluted by pseudoscience and misinformation in your experience?
Yes, I think one of the hard things is when you are coming from a place of information and someone is arguing with you based on Facebook research. A lot of the issue about vaccines have come from that place. Let me just say for the record that Moderna has been working on mRNA vaccines for more than a decade. The developers of this vaccine will likely win the Nobel Prize. It is extraordinary how many applications this new mRNA delivery system will have. It's an extraordinary breakthrough, but it's not new. They have been working on this for over a decade. And so the idea that we don't know what we're doing, it's going to magnetize you, it's going to turn you into a lizard person. I mean, I can't promise it won't turn you into a lizard person, but it won't turn you into a lizard person. It's very hard to argue with non-rational arguments.
Right. And how much is any of that bleeding into the courts?
Yes, that was part of the argument with the nurses at Methodist were making, was this is an experimental vaccine. It's untested. We don't know what's going on. The emergency use authorization, it's not safe. And the court said, no, and this is in the Fifth Circuit, which is very conservative generally. And for the court to say, no, this is not a novel delivery system. This is not a novel vaccine. They did trials. It is safe. It's extraordinarily safe. You're going to feel like you got punched in the arm for a couple days. I'll take it to survive COVID.
We had a question come in about ADA law. Most organizations in the atheist, skeptic, humanist space are organizations with under 15 employees, full-time employees, and aren't bound by ADA. But
right.
What would you say are the ethical and legal obligations of these organizations, and especially as an employee, especially if an employee informs of a disability?
Well, if you have more than 5 full-time employees in California, you are subject to the ADA. So, but I will always say that if an employer is making a good faith effort, if you come to an employer and who only has 4 full-time employees, and you make a reasonable request that is not expensive, it is bad PR for any business to say, I refuse to consider that. And I would encourage employers to think about the fact that 30% of people in the United States have some sort of disability. We're the largest minority group on earth. And we're also the only group that anyone can become a member at any moment with no warning. And it's bad business and just bad humaning to say this is inexpensive, not difficult, but we still won't do it because we don't have to. And I'm happy to help an employee whose employer says, well, I only have 14 full-time employees. I will gladly help them with their PR angle. The best thing you can do is to approach your employer from, hey, this is just good business. Saying we're going out of our way to accommodate our disabled employees sends a terrific message, whereas we're going out of our way not to accommodate disabled employees sends a terrible message. It's all about being on the right side of just good humaning.
Good humaning. I like that. But before I ask a few more of these questions, I wanted to ask a little bit about prisons, which I know are notoriously uninviting for most marginalized communities. But
yeah, I don't recommend them if you can avoid them.
But I'm curious if there's been any legal consideration or changes. I mean, it's been chaos watching how poorly prisons have handled and how little policy care there's been for prisoners throughout COVID, but if there's been any more conversations.
Have an
there.
exceptionally hard time exercising their ADA rights just in general. But unfortunately, and actually, there have been a lot of issues surrounding voting. But we haven't seen a lot of, let's just be honest, our courts move slowly. And some of the cases that are being brought against our prison systems are being brought as class actions. And that when you have a lot of members of a class, it often takes a long time to take the steps up the chain. So I expect there to be case law in the next 6 months, but I am not, there has not been definitive, determinative action on specifically COVID in prisons, that other than guidance issued from the CDC.
Right, okay. We got a very specific question, kind of a clarification of what you were talking about earlier. Can businesses and organizations require proof of vaccination for members of the public that enter their facility?
Yes, I believe they can. California is working on a vaccination verification system that will be rolled out next week. Currently, we're sort of on the honor system, which I hate, because the people who aren't going to get vaccinated also are going to lie about it. And I will just make this point, and you can share it widely. Faking those vaccination cards, creating fake vaccination cards is a federal crime. They are federal records, and forging a vaccination card is a federal crime. So just, bring that up when you see somebody who's clearly got something they made up on their computer. But yes, right. I believe employers will be able to require vaccination in their places. And I think that as that continues and as time goes on, we will see more people just sort of bow to pressure and get vaccinated. But the issue comes when next year we all need boosters. How are you going to verify booster status? And then we start over. So there's a lot of sort of in the weeds stuff that needs to get worked out. But I personally own a small business. I have one full-time employee. I had 4. I have 1. And I am requiring that anyone coming to my office be vaccinated because I'm immunocompromised and it's just not safe for me to be around unvaccinated people. And I invite someone to sue me over it.
Are there, getting back to employers, we had a question come in about working from home and how many people are now happy and relieved to be working from home for a variety of reasons. And yet we know employers are talking about bringing people back into the office. Can you talk about the cases that we're running into and going to probably deal with over the next few years there?
Absolutely. One of the biggest areas of employment accommodation that has been active in the last 5 years or so have been attendance cases where attendance was deemed to be an essential function that could not be eliminated. But then we all worked from home, so we know it's lies. And so if you've been able to show that you can work from home, employers will now have to prove that you really do physically need to be in the office. I expect to see a lot more cases of people saying this is not an essential function. I anticipate that in the next in the next edition of my book, that there will be those cases. I've already started writing on the new edition, and we have about a dozen cases, but there's no real way to see it as a trend until we get circuit court decisions. Right now, it's just sort of a smattering of district courts all over the country making disparate rules, and we haven't seen it coalesce in the federal courts yet. But I think that will happen in the next 6 months, and I think employers will have a very difficult time saying, we allowed you to work from home for a year, and now you have to physically come back for jobs that can be done. I mean, again, if you've been wait staff, you're going to have to physically go back. But if you, and it also raises issues about teachers who are immunocompromised. students don't always keep their masks on. I mean, especially like I've got nieces who are 7 and 4. Good luck with that. To their teachers, good luck with that. And so what if a teacher's immunocompromised? I've been teaching from home for a year. Why can't I continue teaching at home for a year? Well, classroom management is part of the job. They were also at home, and you can see the push and pull. But the bottom line is you're going to have to do some individualized assessments. You can't make a blanket rule. The best thing an employer can do is take each case as it comes.
For those that are less educated about disability advocacy, could you just give a quick introduction to sub-minimum wage and how that impacts the community?
It makes me angry. Sub-minimum wage is a rule that allows employees with disabilities, especially working in life skills programs or at Salvation Army, those type of
Goodwill,
Goodwill, thank you. That was the word I was looking for. It was Goodwill. Allows them to get paid cents for hours of work. 45 cents for an hour. It's frankly outrageous. And the problem is that part of the way that they design how they pay them is based on time testing, which, if you know anything about people with disabilities, time testing, not really our thing as a general rule for our group. And then it can come out to as low as like 17 cents per 10 minutes. And it's extraordinarily inappropriate, in my opinion, because people are people, and living in LA is expensive. And if you're going to pay someone 17 cents for an hour's worth of work, there's nothing they can buy with that. And I think we need to readjust our minimums for that sliding scale of work. I think the minimums have been set far, 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 far too low. Part of the people working with disabilities is that it helps them build self-esteem and money, and they learn valuable life skills. But if you're making no money for very hard work, that is very devaluing and demoralizing. And there is something inherently valuable about the dignity of work. But we need to treat people with dignity too.
And has there been any progress, or we see any progress in areas like that? I mean, I worked a political campaign a few years back, and we talked about that issue, and I've run into few issues as exploitative as that one.
It breaks your heart.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, there's just not a lot of appetite by a certain side of the aisle to remedy that. Because my personal opinion is that I think every human being is valuable and has worth, and that is worth investing in. And not everyone sees it that way.
Yeah. I mean, but in general, even what would be the political parties that you would think would be more interested in this, it's been such low priority disability policy is my experience. Are you seeing any changes there, or?
No, because to pay people what they deserve would be cost prohibitive for some of these special interest groups. But they should pay people a living wage. Every person who works should get paid a living wage. And the problem is we haven't all agreed on paying not disabled people a living wage yet. So it's seen as sort of a sub issue of the minimum wage. If we can't get everyone to agree that $15 minimum wage is a life-sustaining wage, we also can't get agree that a $10 minimum wage for disabled employees is reasonable, as opposed to a 50 cent an hour minimum wage, which is sort of where it is now.
Okay, thank you. There was a question about global travel and outlook for federal or state vaccination cards and whether they'll be required. What knowledge do you have of that?
Well, the thing about the certainly vaccine passports to other countries will become a thing, because other countries can decide whether or not we can come in. And there's not a lot we can do about that. But in terms of state vaccine passports, I'm sure most of you have seen that Florida did sort of a reverse vaccine passport, where if you ask for vaccine status on anything, you get fined a gajillion dollars, and it's really stupid. Same thing in Texas. But Florida has made it, the cruise industry is an $8 billion a year industry. And Florida has said, if you're requiring proof of vaccine, you get fined $50,000 every time you require it. Well, the cruise industry, they'll take off from Nassau if they have to in the Bahamas. And I think that, I believe that Governor DeSantis will have to walk that back, because there is no way that he is going to alienate the $8 billion a year cruise industry that goes in and out of Florida. It would be the smaller ships like, Celebrity and Royal Caribbean, they don't care. They'll do whatever he says. But your higher end ships like Viking and Crystal and Celebrity, did I say Celebrity before? I didn't mean Celebrity before. I meant the one where everyone drinks, the booze cruise. You know what I mean. Those, they don't care. But the high end lines, Holland America and so on, they're going to continue requiring vaccine status, because the people that cruise are wealthy people that want to make sure that they're safe. And they're also, cruisers tend to be over 50. So it's just sort of a combination of the market forces and the clientele. But I believe that, no, we will not have statewide travel passports because of Florida and Texas and their terrible governors.
There was a comment about asset maximums, which I've never heard of before.
Yes. So if you're a person with a disability and you receive SSDI, you receive Social Security Disability Insurance from the government, they have a maximum amount you can have in your bank account. They don't want you to accrue money. For some reason, they think that you can't be disabled and have an extra $100 in case of an emergency. So they essentially put asset maximums on your account. So if you have more than, I honestly can't be sure of what the asset maximum is currently, something like $2,000, but it's something, yeah, I think it's $2,000. And if you go over $2,000, you stop getting SSDI. So it forces you to spend all your money immediately upon receiving it, which is a terrible cycle, because what happens is suddenly you have one emergency vet bill, or you have an emergency trip to the ER, and you are in debt that you never climb out of again. And it also, the asset maximums put a penalty on getting married. Because as an individual, you can have $2,000, but as a married couple, you can only have $3,000. So if I'm disabled, which I am, and my husband has a good job, which he does, I would be doomed, because we have too much money. Even though my medical bills can run $25,000 a year easily, they are not willing to allow me to be disabled because he makes too much money. And that's sort of a terrible situation we put our people with disabilities, so that it basically penalizes them for getting married.
Right. So take a community like ours. We are the size of a lot of small churches around Los Angeles right now, and there's many other communities like ours in other cities. If we could focus time and attention on something related to these laws or advocacy in support or comrades with the disability community, what would you recommend?
I would recommend supporting vaccination efforts, and because it's the best way for us to get out of this pandemic is to get everybody vaccinated. It's been really difficult. I think we all feel that this past 18 months has been the hardest of our lives, and we all want to get out, and we all want to see our families. I haven't seen mine since December of 2019, and I miss them terribly. And during the pandemic, I lost both my grandmothers. I lost my grandmother in February to COVID, and I haven't gotten to see my parents and hug them. And the only way that I will feel safe doing that, if safe getting on a plane, is if I know everyone else is vaccinated. And if they're not vaccinated, they're wearing masks. And until we are all safe, none of us are safe. We need to take care of each other because we're better than that, quite frankly. If you want to access my links, some of the articles I've written on COVID, I'll pull them up, pull up the link to my site. Am I still on sharing my screen?
No, I turned it off. You're good.
Oh, good. I just want to make sure I wasn't hunting for things on my screen while I had you all standing by. But I will hunt for the links to my some of my articles on this that are free. They're on my research scholar site, and my co-authors on most everything are my parents, and you can link from any of my articles that I've written with my dad to my dad's scholarly site and read all of his hundreds of thousands of articles about COVID and employment issues. He's the real expert. I'm his publicist.
You're hot on his heels to take over.
Yes, speaking of, Meg posted about the airlines not enforcing the mask policies. She had told me, she's a friend of mine and had just traveled to Texas from Seattle and back on United, and they weren't enforcing mask wearing. So I contacted United. My mom has now contacted United, and we are working on a strongly worded statement to United from a bunch of disability law scholars about how important it is to enforce the mask policy for our own safety. I fully believe that if you will not wear a mask, you need to be kicked off the flight and put on a list, and you can't fly for a year, because you're putting me in danger. I mean, truly putting me in danger, putting people like me in danger.
Well, if there's any opportunities for our community to sign on to letters or join in advocacy, we've done work and are trying to do more work around religious exemptions that hurt public health. But yeah, we thank you for being here. And
here's a link to my scholarly papers on
perfect.
So that you can read some of the articles I've written about COVID and employment, and some of the articles on these topics that I was discussing.
Great. Okay. Yeah, we wish you absolute best success. I'm going to turn off the live stream here in a second. Before I do, where else can people follow your work or find your information?
At Julia Irzyk on Twitter. It's just my name. And I am that's pretty much the best place to find me. Anytime I write a new article, I post it on Twitter, and I'm happy to, and I post it for free on my SSRN site. So that if you want to follow along, you can pin my SSRN, and anytime I have a new article on the topic, it'll alert you. The COVID and employment article was one of the top employment law articles in the country for several weeks in a row. So someone's reading it. I'll take it. Small
Wonderful.
Victories.
Great. And I even just got an email from someone. Another group wants to have you speak after they caught
What?
this talk today. So I'll do a connector email after this.
That's crazy. So. I was very convinced that I would give a bad speech and everyone would hate it. So
no. You are clearly an expert, and we really appreciate your time. So I'm going to turn off the live stream. Thank you all for attending our event. You can learn more about Atheists United at atheistunited.org. Thank you.